everyone, and welcome to the Farmer Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmer Supply Association. Well, we're taping on July the 12th. Our last taping was on June the 16th, and the big story continues to be hot, dry, and expensive. When I'm talking about hot, of course, I'm talking about the temperatures, the dry conditions without rainfall, and it's been an extremely expensive crop for our farmers, probably the most expensive ever, I would assume, and that's really compounding things when you've got all three of those things going on together. So it's been a tough year. It continues to be a tough year. We don't see a lot of end in sight looking at the forecast. A spotty shower here and there maybe, but overall just a very dry, very hot forecast. So, our farmers are battling and they're going to get through it. We'll see some yield reductions and we're going to see some issues without a doubt. But anyway, knowing our farmers, they'll battle through this thing and survive it. Again, our last taping was on June 16th. At that time, we actually talked about this starting. Again, my main topic, I think, on that one was actually getting hot and dry. We were kind of on the cusp of things getting going, but 4 weeks later, it has really gotten much worse. So anyway, that continues to be the main story. I keep up with weather records from both Newport and Jonesboro. Since I live in Jonesboro and work over in this area, I try to keep up records of both of those places. And looking at the rainfall data for here in Newport, and especially going Newport north in Jackson County, it's been 47 days since we had a significant rain. That was on May 26th, I think. For Jonesboro, 36 days. That was on June the 6th, I think. So, a long time, over a month without rain in both of those places. 4 straight days last week over 100 degrees, and many days, mid 90s plus, mid to upper 90s. So again, the heat and dry conditions just stay with us. We've had a little bit of relief on the on the temperatures. It's actually not too bad out here today, consider where we were last week. So things have gotten a little better on the temperature front, and we'll absolutely take what we can get. Irrigation continues to be the real battle. It's just hard to keep up. Especially if you've got one well that's feeding or one system that's feeding multiple crops, multiple fields, it's about impossible to keep up. And even in other situations, it's just really hard to keep up with irrigation the way you want to. You may be able to keep the field wet, not showing obvious drought stress, but even in those situations, we're probably losing yield because you're not getting, as much irrigation and as quality of an irrigation as you would otherwise. So that's kind of where we're at weather-wise. What I want to do this month is talk about pest management. It's kind of that time of the year where we transition and start talking about insects and diseases and things like that. So I want to talk about all three of the major pests that we see, and that's weed control, diseases, and insects. So first we're going to talk about rice and the situation with rice as far as those different pests. Starting out with weed control. I'd like to be totally over with weed control right now, but we're not. In my job, when planting starts, weed control is number one on the list, and it goes really through now, and we're not done yet. We still got some late season weeds we're dealing with. Some of these we'll spend money on and try to control, and a lot of them we're just going to let go at this point because we spend all the money we need to, and control at this point is kind of difficult anyway. In rice, the major weeds that we're still seeing coming through and we're dealing with is number one is barnyard grass. That's the number one weed in rice. And, we've battled it with residual herbicides. We've battled it with post-emergence herbicides if they broke through the residual. And, sometimes we're still battling it. I think with the hot temperatures and the stage the rice is in, we're about done battling it. It kind of is what it is right now, and we're just going to live with what we got. Most fields are not to the point that it's going to take the rice down. Just kind of cosmetically, may not look as good as it ought to, and most fields are in that situation right now. But as long as it's not taking a lot of yield or not taking the rice down, we're going to be okay with that. So that's the main weed that we always talk about in rice. A weed that we've kind of started dealing with over the last few years and becoming more and more of a problem are the annual sedges. We see two major annual sedges that we're dealing with. They're becoming more and more prominent. Rice flat sedge has been around forever, and we're still dealing with that one. Another one called white margin sedge has kind of increased more and more over the last decade or so, and we're seeing a lot of white margin sedge. A lot of both of those sedges in the same field. We're trying to deal with that. As far as some of the herbicides I've seen work, and I've seen some great successes on annual sedge. Loyant is awesome on annual sedge. Also, rogue is good on annual sedge, and I've had a lot of success with Bazagran plus stam this year. So we've had some good success on controlling this. It's money we don't like spending because we normally spend most of our money on barnyard grass, but we still have gotten good control. A couple of major issues with those herbicides. With Loyant, soybeans hate it. So if you're near soybeans or if the wind's blowing towards soybeans, you can't use Loyant, so that hurts us there. With the rogue, you have to have usually 0 grade irrigation. The water has to stay stable and pretty deep if you can. So 0 grade situations. Also straight levee fields where you've got multiple inlet irrigation, sometimes you can make it work there. So that's the big issue with annual sedge, is some of those herbicides just can't be used in certain situations. Another weed that we see coming through late is indigo, and we try to take care of that one with things like Permit Plus, also Facet as a pre, and also Grandstand can be very effective on that. So that's some of the ways that we try to control that one before it breaks through at this point. I want to go back to barnyard grass on rice real quickly. Again, once it goes through that canopy and it's hot, there's not many of these grass herbicides that are very good. It's really a crapshoot after that. Have had a couple of successes with regiment this year, so on some bigger grass, so that is one good thing, but overall very difficult to control. Let's switch to insects in rice. Rice stink bug is number one there. Just as soon as this rice starts heading out, we're just getting very near. We'll need to be scouting for stink bugs. I think one thing that the university entomologists have been saying is don't go too crazy at the start, especially if you've got just marginal populations, just right at threshold or so. Maybe wait a little bit, because most of the real economic damage is done after we get to the dough stage. That's when we have the pecky rice situation develop, when the stink bug feeds on that developing kernel. So don't go crazy early, maybe unless you've got high numbers. As far as the insecticides, still the pyrethroids are the cheapest, but our control is really starting to go downhill with the pyrethroids. I've had failures both of the last 2 years with pyrethroids. Malathion and Tenshu are more effective, but again, they're not very available. So we're working, the university's working with the plant board on trying to get a Section 18 for indigo insecticide. That's an insecticide we used last year that was very effective. We got the Section 18 on that. I wrote a letter this week in trying to help the Extension Service and Plant Board on this to hopefully get that Section 18. So hopefully we can get that, because that is something that will definitely give us more consistent control. Finishing up with diseases on rice. The main thing I want to talk about first are the smuts, kernel smut and fall smut, also Cercospora and air brown leaf spot. You don't scout for these diseases. You have to make a preventative control, a preventative application of a fungicide at the boot stage. As far as the smuts, things we want to consider before we make that application: field history. Do I have a field history of the smuts? Susceptible varieties to the smuts. Late planting seems to make it worse, so if I had some really late planting, I want to think about it, especially there. And excessive nitrogen. Those are 4 factors that really aggravate the smut. So if you got those, I think you definitely want to consider a smut application. You might want to otherwise as well, but those are really key factors to consider when making a smut application. As far as narrow brown leaf spot, this is not a disease we see every year. It's kind of a hit or miss disease, but it can cause significant yield loss when it does. Late planting is probably the major thing that we look at, or causes an issue or aggravates the narrow brown leaf spot. As far as fungicides, propiconazole or tilt at minimum of 6 ounces per acre. For narrow brown leaf spot, probably want 8 to 10 ounces per acre. Of course, you got tilt, you got the generics, you've got Quilt XL and Amistar Top, both with the propiconazole in it, so those are possibilities. Timing, boot stage before that boot splits open. I like to see that flag leaf just totally out. When you see the base of that flag leaf, to me that's the timing to go with right there, so keep that in mind. Sheath blight and blast, with the weather conditions we've got now, this hot and dry, sheath blight and blast hopefully won't develop, but we need to be scouting for those as well. I want to talk about the weeds. Again, the same pests in soybeans. As far as weeds in beans, of course, pigweed is number one, but we've got effective controls. Our Enlist system is doing very good with that. Liberty, on the Extend Flex beans is doing a very good job. So, we've got some good controls for pigweeds. Barnyard grass is coming through, and it's probably one of the next things we look at. and it's becoming more difficult to control. You know, if you look at the MP44, Roundup is rated a 9 for one application, a 10 for sequential applications. But in a lot of places, we're really not seeing that maybe as much as we used to, especially with the weedy rice and the barnyard grass as well. So, you know, I think we need to be thinking about the clethodim, the Section 3 material, the generic select that we sell. So I think you need to be considering that for those weedy rice situations and also for the barnyard grass situations. Going to the insect part of it, again, our main insect we always talk about in soybeans is corn earworm. There is a dynamic threshold in the University MP144 publication, and it takes into account the price of beans and the price of the insecticide plus the application, and gives you a threshold of how many corn earworms per 25 sweeps you need to have to recommend to justify treatment. And right now, if you look at $14 beans and a $20 cost for including both the insecticide and the application, the threshold would be right at 7 right now. So if you go 25 sweeps and you're getting over 7 worms, you need to consider an application. As far as insecticides, again with the basic insecticides that we've used in the past, Besiege, Prevathon, Vanacore, Elevest, those are some of the better ones that that are the best ones that we would recommend in these situations for the corn earworm if you met that threshold. The old generic Lambda Psi material, some people get by with it, some don't. To me, the control kind of slipped with it last year, so I know with that cost, it's real. You really want to think people are going to think about using it, but to be very careful, because if it doesn't work, you're in there for another application and more cost. So another insecticide that's come about over the past few years is Heligen. That's a biological control. It's a little different in that we have to get this on the front end. If you start finding any corn earworms at all between that first corn earworm and up to that threshold, you want to keep it below threshold for in order for this to be effective, then Heligen would be a good choice for you. So keep that in mind. Again, you pretty much got to be scouting regularly, have a consultant that's scouting regularly, because if you don't, then a lot of times those numbers are going to blow up above threshold real quick, and you won't ever catch them and be able to use the Heligen. Again, you've got to use Heligen when there's very low numbers out in the field, small larvae. So keep Heligen in mind, and when it fits the bill, and I think it's a great material to use, very effective and very economical. So keep that in mind on the corn earworm control in soybeans. Finally, finishing up with diseases in soybeans. I don't think we'll have as many automatic fungicide applications this year because of the economics and probably the lower yield potential we're going to see. So a lot of scouting and spraying if you do see diseases. But if you do choose to make an automatic fungicide, if you've had a lot of success with those, you've got good irrigation, good yield potential out there, then certainly you may consider an automatic fungicide application. I think growth stage is a real key, and I'd like to go about an R4 growth stage, which is when the pod's pretty much got a full pod. A full-size pod. That's when you want to make those automatic applications. Some people push making those earlier. I think if you make it much earlier than that, then there's that opportunity that the fungicide may run out before the crop is made, and you would be forced, possibly if you had a disease come in, to make a second application. So I like to hit around that R4 stage at full-size pod, and that way hopefully that application will carry you through to the end of the seasons. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I want to say I hope it rains and gets cooler, and I don't know if that's going to happen or not. Hopefully at least we'll get the cooler temperatures even if it doesn't rain, but hopefully we'll get that combination of both of those, and it'll help this crop out a lot, because that's what we need right now. Until next time, this has been Randy Kopechka with your Farmer Supply Association Agri Report for July.